If you're a first-time author, you might be coming up against a few common mistakes, and it's perfectly okay. When we all start out, we just don't know what we're doing. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about some common mistakes for you to consider as you embark on your writing journey. Hi, I'm Charlotte Tuberfield. I'm your book coach and developmental editor, and let's talk about the common mistakes of first-time writers. So when you're writing your first book, it is often a very steep learning curve. Not only are you learning about the craft of writing itself, if you're writing fiction or nonfiction, there's a craft to learn there. And you're also probably navigating some of the mindset pieces. So thinking about the self-doubt or the imposter syndrome. When we embark on doing something new, that imposter syndrome can definitely crop up. All that to say, writing is a very kind of thrilling but also daunting journey. And while every writer's path is unique, there are a few pitfalls that I want to talk about in this video to really help guide you and direct you so that you can start off on the right foot. By understanding some of these common pitfalls that first-time writers fall into, you can hopefully help to steer yourself away from them, not only avoid them, but also be able to be aware if you're falling into any of these, so that then you can navigate your writing process with more confidence and more clarity. So the first area where I see a lot of first-time writers not understanding where they need to start in the process, and it doesn't actually start with just sitting down to write. It starts with understanding what is the purpose behind your book. So yes, every book has a purpose. There is a reason for it existing. So not only do you have your own personal why for why you want to be writing, maybe you just love books or you feel like you have a soul calling to write a book, but by really getting clear on the purpose of your book, you're also able to communicate who your book is for, so who's going to be reading this book, and why they're going to pick up your book. Why are they going to look at that and be like, oh, that's the book I need to read next? So your book's purpose is a way for you to really understand why a reader is going to pick up your book and helps you articulate what it is that they are going to experience by reading your book. So are you dropping them into a brand new kind of fantasy world? Are you writing a nonfiction book that's going to help navigate them to move forward in their business or their personal development journeys? So this purpose ultimately becomes very much so the anchor for how you're going to then move through the writing process. It's also a great filter that you can use and come back to. So if you are coming up against a scene, a chapter, or maybe a personal story you want to share, and you're like, I don't know if this fits in the book, you can come back to what is the purpose of my book and then ask yourself, does this scene, does this story really support the purpose of the book? And is it going to support the reader's journey? So a lack of clarity around the purpose of your book can make you sort of go on detours in writing or just finding yourself in different places and you're like, how did I get here? And so it can be a great place to help redirect your writing and keep it focused so that the story you have in your head is also readable for other people and consumable, and they're going to enjoy it just as much as you intended them to. So this is why having a very clear purpose to your book is sometimes missed. Sometimes people don't know what the purpose of their book is, and that's also okay. As you start the writing journey, you might be exploring this, and maybe it's really helpful just to have that question in mind. But I recommend sitting down and just trying to brain dump or mind dump everything onto a piece of paper so that you start to really understand how you can articulate the purpose of your book. So for fiction writers, this might be leaning into what does it feel like to read my book? How is the reader going to feel when they reach the end? For nonfiction authors, this is really looking at what is the key takeaway of your book? What is the reader going to learn or maybe feel empowered or inspired to do as a result of reading your book? So if you're looking to help flesh this out a little bit more, I do have book concept statement that is within my idea to manuscript workbook, which you can find on Amazon. There's also a course that accompanies that, which you can find on my website at hernarrative.com. I'll drop the links below, but check those out if you really got this idea and you want to flesh out your why and your purpose a little bit more so that you can continue to move through the writing process with confidence and clarity. So the second mistake I often see with first-time authors is skipping the planning stage. So I know there's a lot of opinions around outlining, not to outline, and I don't always think that everyone needs an outline, but I do think giving yourself some sort of framework or understand that there are certain milestones or certain points that you want to reach in your book is really important. So knowing that you have a beginning, middle, and end, and you have some ideas of how you're going to get to all those places is really important. Even if you like to write from the seat of your pants, I still recommend writing down as much as you can to give yourself a framework. Often creativity needs direction, otherwise we're going to create a story that feels very unclear and might lose our readers along the way. So Giving yourself framework doesn't mean that you're trapping yourself or containing your ideas in ways that you don't want to. It can be really beneficial to help guide your story in a way that's going to be really enjoyable for others to read. Even if you're just using a very simple roadmap, I absolutely recommend sitting down and just thinking about how are you going to take the readers through your story? What is their experience going to be like? What are the most important events that are going to happen along the way? And so for fiction writers, I always recommend the 3-act structure. I feel like that is a great way to understand what Act 1 is, what Act 2 is, what Act 3 is. And within each of those, there's a couple milestones that you can write towards so that you can make sure you're moving your story forward and engaging your readers. And I also have a blog post on that really breaks down that 3-act structure, and another video on this channel, which you can check out, and I'll link below. And for my planners, I know it can be really exciting to sit down and plan out every single detail, every character profile, every scene, so that you might have sticky notes all over your wall that tells you exactly where you need to go. I know for me that level of planning would impede me on ever writing. So I like to do a little bit of both, where I plan as much as I feel is right. And then when I feel like it's good enough, that's when I want to sit down and feel motivated to kind of see and explore how the story unfolds as I'm writing. So regardless of how much detail you want to put into the planning or outlining stage, I definitely invite you to at least put some sort of framework and really understand your story arc and that beginning, middle, and end of your story, regardless if you're writing fiction or nonfiction, so that you know where you are going and where you want to take your readers. So again, you want to make sure that you're delivering on that purpose of your book. Another common mistake I see first-time authors doing is either overwriting or underwriting in the writing process. So you might be working towards getting that first draft of your book done, and you might find that you were shooting to have a novel of 80,000 words, but you only got about 40,000 words. So that can feel a little bit frustrating and feeling like, I don't know if my story is good enough or long enough to be a full-length novel. So I invite you to learn what it is that you need that first draft to be. I know for myself, I am very plot-driven when I'm writing my first draft, which means that I'm very focused on like, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And I am not as connected to the nuance of some of the descriptions of like the setting and the scene and the characters. I know for myself that if I try and do all of that at once in the first draft, I will never finish. So what I have learned to encourage myself to do is embrace that process. And what I do is that first draft is very much so me working out the plot. I just need to know, does this make sense? Does it work? Then I know in the second draft, I'm going to go back through and I'm going to work in the scenes and making sure they're really clear. The setting is clear. I'm going to add in a ton more description and those feeling states that we want the reader to connect with, those emotional states. And I'm going to write in all the sensory awareness. So like, what are people seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling in all the scenes? So for me, I know that like my first and second draft are kind of combined my first draft. So I invite you to just really think about, how do you need to get the story out so that you have something to work with on the page. So I know my first drafts, I tend to underwrite, knowing that I'm going to go back and add quite a hefty amount of word count in my next draft. Where I also know a lot of other authors will overwrite. This means that you've written a 500,000 page book and you're like, oh gosh, now I have to cut it down. So it's not to say that underwriting or overwriting are mistakes necessarily, but I do think having awareness of where you want your book to land as far as word count goes can be really helpful to, again, help you frame ideas and really decide how much time do you need to spend on each concept or each scene or developing certain tension within your book. So if you're writing fiction, you might be shooting for that 80,000 to 90,000 word count. And that's great to keep in mind so that you can make sure that you are being concise when you need to be concise in your book, but also expanding in descriptions when that's most serves your story. What we want to do is avoid writing fluff for the sake of fluff. Same with nonfiction. You want to make sure that you're working towards that word count. A lot of nonfiction sometimes falls around that 50,000 word mark, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. So again, we want to make sure that we're focusing our ideas and emphasizing the right ideas at the right time for our readers and not just adding words to add words. Because I do think it's easier to add words and it's harder to reduce words. When you have to cut your darlings at the end to shrink your word count, it can be a really painful process. So for me personally, I prefer to be able to add words and not have to cut words. But again, feel out what feels right for you. If you find that you need to write really big books knowing you're going to cut down your descriptions and you're okay with that, then invite you to embrace that process. But same if you're underwriting, it's also okay knowing that you can add in more. So maybe this isn't so much a mistake, but a word of advice, a word of caution, just to keep in mind as you're moving through the writing process. So the next mistake I often see first-time authors doing is relying too much on passive voice. This is something that can make your writing feel less engaging and a little bit weak, like you're not really standing behind what you're saying. While passive voice has its place, it can also really distance your reader from what's taking place in your story. So for example, instead of saying the decision was made by the team, you could say the team made the decision. So that is more decisive, right? You're kind of like, there's an action happening. From the fiction perspective, when you are using more action verbs, you're actually creating more of a dynamic and immersive scene. So we can feel the action versus just kind of reading about the action. So in nonfiction side, using active verbs can really make your point a little bit more clear and be more persuasive if you're trying to move people into action. So I definitely recommend looking for opportunities of where you can incorporate more active verbs and active voice so that you are really engaging people and appealing to their senses and helping them to move forward both in reading and potentially in their life. Okay, so the next mistake I see first-time authors making is not taking the editing process seriously. Seriously, this is a big deal. And this isn't just because I am an editor, this is a really important part of the process. It is incredibly hard to edit the work that we are writing. So many times the ideas in our head don't quite land on the page in the way that we intended, and those that are consuming it are often left confused. And the last thing we want is a confused reader. I also see where authors just jump straight into looking for typos in their manuscript, and they're not actually looking at the overall structure of their story or reading for clarity. So I see this a lot in the self-publishing, and it's no shame or blame, but it is really important that we are creating well-structured stories that are easy for people to consume and understand. We don't want to make them have to search out and look for characters that maybe we left off on page 25, or trying to fill in plot holes, being like, wait, what happened to this? Like, we never got the tied up loose end there. So really making sure that your logic and your brain is landing the way that you wanted it to. We all have our blind spots, and we can only lean on spell checkers for so much of it. And so this is where getting feedback, either if it's from a critique group or beta readers or professional editors, can be so helpful for you to make sure that as other people get their books in your hand, they feel really good about that experience. Because the last thing we want is bad reviews and no one reading our book. So the editing process is an important part of the process, and I have a lot more tools and resources for this, and I also have a video on how to approach the self-editing process. So I know it can be an investment, especially if you're working with a professional editor, but it's really important for producing the best book you can that's going to really impact people and create that inspiration in the world that you would desire. And the last common mistake I see with first-time authors is giving up too soon. Oh, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, writing is such a steep curve, especially when you're writing your first book. There is so much to learn about the craft of writing. There's also a lot to learn about yourself and navigating, again, those feelings of writer's block or procrastination, imposter syndrome. So don't give up. You have absolutely got this. And I'm here to help you provide resources along that journey. So please let me know below in the comments if there's any topics you'd like me to cover further. But I encourage you, as you are writing your first draft, to really continue to show up for that. Be consistent, even if you're only writing 5 words at a time. That consistency is what's going to build up enough words for that full-length book that you will reach the end. So becoming a published author is an incredible achievement, but it does require a little bit of persistence, patience, and preparation. So I hope covering some of these common mistakes has been helpful for you to think about how you can frame moving forward and being really successful and feeling confident in writing that first draft of your book. So I encourage you to keep learning, keep writing, and keep going. You've got this, and be sure to like this video if you found it helpful, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.